I'm Larry Walklin. We're recording this on October 29, 1996. We're talking with John Webster. John Webster is a member of a long-time prominent Omaha family who got into the broadcasting business in the 1970s with the acquisition of the license of KEFM. John, let's talk a little bit about how you and your dad at the time got interested in broadcasting and acquired the license.
I always thought that I would be involved in the print media business, and had actually done some work on minor newspapers out in the San Francisco area. When I moved back to Omaha, I joined my father in the investment field, and we were involved with basically venture capital. We had heard that the licenses for KEFM and KOIL were going to be coming up for grabs. And so at that time, my father and I and a veteran broadcaster by the name of Joe Baker put together a company known as the Webster Baker Broadcasting Company to file for those licenses. And the commission in those days had certain criteria that you had to meet.
This is the Federal Communications
Yes,
Commission.
that is correct. And we thought our idea was that we would put together such a huge, strong company that no one in their right mind would ever want to file against us. And we must have done a wonderful job of that, because 11 groups filed on top of us instantly. And we went through a process that the FCC had in those days known as the comparative hearing process, which is still in effect, but I believe it has become somewhat limited. The commission based its criteria on, or had criteria on, a couple things. They looked strongly on local ownership. They looked at financial ability. In other words, you had to prove that you could operate a radio station for 1 year without any income whatsoever. You had to have beyond local ownership, you had to show that you did not own any other broadcast properties. The problem with that is that while we were waiting around to achieve our license, we couldn't invest in anything else because it would be a strike against us. And also, we had to make the commitment that once we obtained the license, we would continue on and actually operate it. And that was really something that the opposing groups would hammer away at us on. So anyway, we put together a license, and also during the license application, you had to go through a horrible thing called ascertainment interviews, which meant that you had to go out and interview people from all walks of life within the community, and this would supposedly give you a better feel on what is going on. So anyway, we filed the license in 1976 and sat around and waited for the commission to act on it. During that period of time, the attorney that had been appointed by the FCC to review the application hadn't done anything for approximately 3 years, and then retired, and a new attorney was appointed. And we finally went into a hearing, I believe, probably about 4 or 5 years into the process. All the time the huge attorney bills were being achieved by those in Washington, and the radio station KOIL and KEFM were being operated by a gentleman by the name of Nathan Novak on an interim basis. He supposedly was going to donate all proceeds to charity, more particularly Creighton University. Creighton, and I believe the general public, never really saw any of that money because I don't think they ever broke even on it. We were finally judged the best applicant after approximately 8 years, and were granted a construction permit. Because we were the best applicant, we got to pick which station we wanted, and we picked the FM because at that time it seemed to be on the rise. Or the FM stations in general had to be on the rise, and AMs were declining. The FCC, in their wisdom, because they wanted to have a diversification of views within the local community, split those licenses up, and 2 of our opposing groups that were left merged together and took over the KOIL license. When we received the construction permit, KEFM had been off the air for approximately 3 years. Its tower had blown down during a direct line windstorm, and the interim operator didn't bother to put it on the air. So we had absolutely nothing and had to build it from scratch and put it on the air, about 1983, and it was, I believe, October 21st. So we just celebrated a anniversary about a week ago.
Why did the FCC decide that the successful applicant could choose from the stations? Why didn't they just assign both stations?
That's a very good question. I'm not really sure why they did that. Possibly because we've been involved in it so long, and they were splitting the stations up. They thought maybe the winner ought to be able to pick which property they wanted. But it all had to do, the split up, as I said, had to do with diversification of interests within the community.
How did the FCC decision in which your company won out over the other 10, I guess, applicants, how did what their decision reflect what you thought was going to happen when you first got into the process?
The FCC, in my opinion, has totally changed their philosophy. With the change in the Telecommunication Acts and some other things they've done, I think they've drifted away from diversification of interests and local ownership. I say this for a number of reasons. Back in the early 80s, shortly after we went on the air, the Commission had a ruling which was known as Docket 8090. And what this basically said, that all those individuals that had Class C FMs, of which KEFM was one, had a certain period of time to bring their stations up to maximum code or maximum ability. In other words, you had to take your tower up as high as you possibly could and broadcast at as much power as you were allowed to, or else you would be dropped down into a lower category. As I understand it, some of the thinking behind the FCC in this process was that because the signals would be smaller, wouldn't cover as great a distance, small communities would be allowed to come in and put up, say, a Class A FM, which would serve their needs and that may not be covered by the big cities. What happened was many people came in and applied for those licenses, put up those stations, and then instantly were allowed, or not instantly, but sooner or later were allowed to move closer to larger cities and basically forgot about the small communities, which was totally against the idea of serving the community a license. So that has changed. In addition to that, many of those stations that were move-ins were losing money, and in an effort to be able to sell those licenses, the FCC was encouraged to drop its ownership rules. Now, this is my thinking on it, but the FCC, in dropping their ownership rules, and while it was nice for a local broadcaster who was losing money to be able to sell his station for a large profit to a large corporation, what they have done is they've formed basically mini monopolies that are outside the community of, owned by people outside of the community of license. In Omaha, I believe you have only 2 local owners now, and that's myself owning 1 station, and you have John Mitchell of Mitchell Broadcasting who owns 4. All the other stations are owned by outside groups.
Now, your family's been in Omaha for a long time. What's the advantage that you have as the broadcaster who has the Omaha base?
Well, it's a feel for the community. That is not to say that people, general managers that are hired from within the community, or after you've been in the community for a while, you'll not get a feel for it. But I love the city that I grew up in, just as I love Nebraska. And when I received the license, one of the things I wanted to do was give something back to the community. KEFM, our station, has, I think, accomplished that. We are very civically involved, and it's not just running PSAs or doing public broadcast or public affairs broadcasting or some news coverage or tying in with a Halloween special. We actually throw pretty sizable amounts of financial support back into charitable groups within the city. A couple of things we sponsor Omaha Symphony events. We sponsor things with Fontanelle Forest. We've made contributions to the University of Nebraska at Omaha on their various campaigns recently. So all these things come into play. Other than John Mitchell's group and WOW AM and FM, which are owned and operated by an outside group, I think those three companies are the ones that really contribute. The rest of them do lend something, but I don't think of it as much as they would if they were a local broadcaster.
When there was such a delay between the time that your company filed to request the application for the license and the time that it was granted, what kept you going? Why did you hang on?
After I got into it, I became really fascinated with it, and then you have a matter of competition. You have ego going in on it, and you may be pouring large amounts of time and money into it, but the idea that I'm the best and those other people aren't has a lot to do with it. So I suppose that was probably it. Also the idea of what you would do with it after you had it. And since I really didn't know anything about broadcasting, it probably wasn't a bad idea that we didn't receive it the week after filing the license, because we probably all would have gone home broke. But
when you got the license and you went on the air with the station, how did that period of time, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, how did that match in terms of your expectations, what you thought was going to happen in terms of programming and potential revenue streams and so forth?
It started out basically as a horror story. My father and my partner, Mr. Baker, being older gentlemen, loved beautiful music and were opposed to anything that resembled rock or contemporary music. So the first thing they said was that even though everyone was advising us against it, they said, well, why don't we program beautiful music? If you would have looked at the trends in that era, people were getting out of the beautiful music format, and here we were at the last minute coming in with it. So it was pretty grim for a while, and after receiving the second rating book, which was about a 0.5, my father and I decided that perhaps maybe we better make a quick change or we'd all go home broke. And so about 3 weeks after the rating book, we put together a quick format on gut reaction to things and put our AC format on the air. And that was probably the most fun I've ever had, because you were just sort of flying by the seat of your pants, and I had a bunch of young announcers who were coming over to join me, and we had a lot of wild ideas, and we had a lot of creative fun. Yeah. It's a lot different now. Everything is researched, but that was sort of the tail end of the creative period where you could really have a lot of fun with it.
Just for the sake of the historical note here, review for us the physical facilities, the power and the transmitter height and so forth of the station, please.
We are currently at a 100,000 watts of power. Our original transmitter site was on the old City National Bank building in downtown Omaha. Next is now known as the Orpheum Tower. That's where our backup facility is. We are located on top of the Fox 42 tower, which is near Gretna, Nebraska, and we are currently at approximately 1,200 feet.
What's the range of the station?
We get out about 85 miles.
Which is
all directions.
Which is a fantastic range for an FM license.
Yeah, it's great coverage.
How has the radio business in Omaha evolved over the period of the 80s? I know that you were prominent, for example, in the Metropolitan Omaha Radio Broadcasters Association. How did that come about?
Well, in reality, we were trying to get a handle on what our national reps were doing to us. In other words, a national rep may be saying, well, you didn't get in on that buy because there really wasn't any money in the Omaha market. So we had to get a handle on how much money was being spent on the outside and who was doing what. So no, in those days, everybody was at each other's throats pretty much in the broadcast or in the radio broadcasting business. So we couldn't exchange any type of information because you might have a element of price fixing or something like that. So there was a group that was based out of California, an accountant, and what we all agreed to do is that we would supply our financial figures to that group to get a handle on what was being done, on a gross accounting method on a national level and what money was coming out of different cities. And to do that, we formed the Metropolitan Omaha Radio Broadcasters Association, better known as MORBA, to accomplish that. But it all sprang out of a need to know what type of revenues were being generated within the market. And in that case, a gentleman by the name of Lyle Nelson, who used to work with me and was sales manager for a number of years at KFAB and KGOR and is still in the radio business in Omaha, and a gentleman who was general manager of Z92, and I can't come up with the name right now, it's been so long ago, but the three of us were the ones that met over at Z92 and put MORBA together.
And how did it achieve the goals that you set for
Well, we were able to have all the stations, or the majority of the stations in Omaha, supply financial information to the accountants. So we had a handle on what type of revenues were being generated and where we all stood in relation to other properties. In addition to that, we became a lot closer. Prior to MORBA's founding, there are very few general managers that would even think about sitting down at a table with another general manager. And if there was a radio buy coming up, an advertising buy, and we heard about it, everybody would put knives in their teeth and hop on the poor client before they had an opportunity to react. So that gave us a table that we could sit down and discuss issues relative to our own industry, and it's worked out very well. A large number of the radio stations in Omaha belong to MORBA now, and they meet on a monthly basis for mutual benefit, and there's a lot of teamwork that goes on in the radio business now, whereas before MORBA there wasn't.
How do the rep firms deal with this particular kind of issue, since you indicated that was one of the considerations?
Well, it kept them honest. We knew what was going on, and so if we were not getting the buys, we could go in and say, look, we know that there's money being spent here, and we want a percentage of it. Because the rep firms have tightened up, and there are only a couple of them left, it's not as much an issue, but we still need to know that financial information. It keeps them honest. Yeah, it's been a good thing.
Over the years in a market such as Omaha, typically speaking, whether it's your station or the stations that are generally affiliated with MORBA, how much of the buy would you say would be a local or regional or national from those different kinds of clients?
The majority of the revenue, and I'm speaking for KEFM, the KEFM sees is local. The reason being is it takes national advertisers a lot of time to decide what they're going to do and how that placement's going to be. We're in a fortunate position where we usually run a couple months sold out. So if somebody from the outside wants to buy our station, they're going to have to move on it pretty quickly. We have recently, within the last couple of years, allocated so much time for national buys, so our revenues are up. However, the major portion of Omaha income for all stations is still national, or still local. National would be second, and regional would come in probably in third place.
Talk a little bit about the dynamics when you and these two other gentlemen sat down and talked about setting up Morba. What transpired, and how did that fit together, and where did the variables come from?
Well, it was just a matter of who was going to talk to who, in trying to entice them into the situation, since everybody, for lack of a better term, hated everybody else. And so each of us had an assignment to go out and say, hey, this is a good thing, and why don't you join us? And it just sort of, there wasn't really any structure to it. I can remember distinctly what we were going to call this thing, and I don't recall what the actual name of the organization was, but we thought that we couldn't name it that because it would come out as being morbid as opposed to Morba. So things were quickly changed around. But there really wasn't any structure to it. I mean, it was one of those things that just sort of happened, and it once we got everybody involved with it, they came along. There were some people that were outsiders that never joined until the stations were sold, and then the new owners became more enlightened and decided that'd be a good thing for them to belong to it.
How has that continued from the time that it was founded? When was it founded, I guess I should ask?
I believe it was probably 1985.
And it still exists?
Yes.
And how is it? How's the function? How's the membership changed over the years?
At one time, the membership fell off dramatically. Now I think the majority of the stations in Omaha belong to it and are represented. Ken Fearnow, WOW Radio, is currently president of it. Stations are very active now. There was a dry period where people lost interest. Why, I really don't know. Probably because everybody was busy, and they had better things to do than sit down and discuss, maybe one issue. Now they try to make everything very relevant, and it's been restructured a little bit to make things more timely, to address more things. The officers, I think, are probably doing a lot better job, is what I'm saying, in that when you walk into a meeting, you feel that you get your money's worth because you spend a lot of time going over issues that are of great importance to the individual stations, such as how to compete against television and newspaper. There are other things such as FCC issues that we become involved with from time to time, tax matters, which face all of us.
Now, you became prominent in the Metropolitan Omaha Radio Broadcasters, and I've heard people say that although the officers changed, that you're the person who keeps kind of holding the thing in the channel in the variety of circumstances. You've sort of became very visible, not only in Omaha, but become part of the Nebraska Broadcasters Association, first on the board of directors and later as the president of the association. Talk about how the state association fits with a local broadcaster in Omaha.
Well, the state association is extremely important from the standpoint of being able to be informed about what is happening on a national level, and having a group of individuals who are going to work for you and protect your interests as broadcasters with the federal government. I mean, that is really a key situation. In addition to that, you have various items that happen before the state and local government, as you well know, such as taxation. And if it had not been for the Nebraska Broadcasters Association working with certain government officials, I think that the local broadcaster would be suffering greatly today because of increased taxes on their revenues.
What were some of the things that come to mind from the years that you spent on the board of directors as a vice president, president-elect, and president?
I think nearest and dearest to me would be the Nebraska Broadcasters Association. foundation. I was relatively new on the board, and a gentleman by the name of Dr. Larry Walklin was commenting about a need for a possible foundation. And I had done foundation work in the past and still do with state and national organizations. So I thought maybe this might be an area where I could really help the association. And with the help of a gentleman by the name of Gary Radel, who was with, and still is with Baird Home Law Offices, who gave us legal guidance, we put together a foundation for broadcasters within the state of Nebraska. And while it is a small foundation now, I can see that there are some that are starting to come in, and I think that at some point it will be a major asset to the state. The idea being is that it will provide scholarships to young people in the field of broadcast and journalism, and additionally, it will hopefully provide educational opportunities for the membership so that they can enhance their abilities as broadcasters. So I think it's going to be a wonderful thing down the road, not only for broadcasting, but for the quality of life in the state.
What experience with foundations did you have which led you to move into this area?
I've been involved with the Scottish Rite Foundation of Omaha, which I serve as president. At the time, I was on the board for the Metropolitan Community College Foundation, and was president of the Brown L. Talbot School Foundation, which is a private school in Omaha, Nebraska. And there are other groups that I have been involved with and still am.
Is this the sort of thing that, in your earlier comments about a local broadcaster and local involvement in the community, would these kinds of activities be something that you would?
Very definitely. I spend a great deal of my time involved with civic groups. I was on the hockey committee, which brought Division I ice hockey into Omaha. I'm currently involved with the Omaha Symphony Association as Vice President of Development. Currently actively involved with Fontanelle Forest, the Nebraska Historical Society Foundation. Pretty, active all the way around. In fact, I find now that I have to cut back, and that's not just me. It's members of my staff, that are involved heavily in the Siena St. Francis House, Children's Museum. They're all encouraged to get out and take part in boards or work within the charitable and educational organizations within the city.
Some people say that the personality of the broadcaster, the owner, the manager has something to do with the way the station operates. What do you think about that?
I think that's probably true.
Would these kinds of things be examples of?
Yes.
This is, I suppose, one of those questions that can go either way, but given the circumstances, are the people that you are likely to hire at the station people who share your particular sharing viewpoint in the community, or are those folks who are convinced to do that after they become part of the staff?
I think that I look at that. If someone comes in and talks to me who has just received a degree and obviously pretty green, even though they may have expert working with them, such as yourself, one of the things I look at is their involvement in college groups. If someone was active in a sorority, if someone was active in a newspaper or some charitable organization within the campus, and that gives you a pretty good feel of what they're going to be doing on the outside. So yes, those individuals that have come to work with me usually are those that I would hope would continue on and do this type of thing.
Let's take up the thread of thought again, John, with the Broadcasters Association. Talk a little bit about, you raised the issue of taxes and so forth. What's the role of the Broadcasters Association, the role of leadership there in relationship to governmental issues?
Well, I belong not only to the Nebraska Broadcasters Association, but a coalition made up of advertising agencies, newspapers, billboards, who keep an eye on sales taxes on advertising. And the idea being is that if something comes up, then hopefully the Nebraska broadcasters and these advertising agencies and the billboard people will all go out to their government officials, local officials, and tell them that this is not going to be a good thing, not necessarily because it's not good for broadcasting, but it's not good for the state in general. And the Nebraska Broadcasters Association has been very effective in this. As you'll recall, and you probably went over this quite a bit with Rob Thomas, who was president during the time when we actually...
Your immediate predecessor as president.
Yes. There were some things which through taxation could have a direct impact on the broadcast community, and probably would have hurt the state in general. And the Broadcast Association, through its officers and directors, and then by their contacts to the local broadcasters, created a huge groundswell which was able to save the broadcast industry within the state from taxes which would have been very detrimental.
This was a tax on program
Yes,
content
exactly.
that wasn't legislated at the time, but was one that was being applied
That's
anyway.
right, yes.
And how did the association respond to that?
We created legislation to make that form of taxation inactive. And as I said, the local broadcasters went to their state senators and those in power within the state. And it was one of the few really unified efforts I have ever seen before the unicameral, not from the Broadcast Association standpoint, but from the standpoint that you had people in western Nebraska and central Nebraska and the larger cities all working together to get something accomplished, which was, beneficial. So.
And just for clarification of our records here, you were president-elect of the Broadcasters Association at the time that much of that was transpiring.
That's correct, yes.
And you were president of the association in 94, 95, following
That's right.
Rob Thomas from Norfolk that you alluded to earlier, who was president the previous year.
That's correct.
When you talk to governmental officials, elected officials, appointed officials, what's their, in your judgment, what's their perception of the influence of broadcasting and broadcasters?
It varies. You have some who are 100% behind the broadcast community. They see its benefits. You have others who dislike broadcasters because they feel that maybe some newscaster someplace along the line may have attacked them. You have those that don't really understand broadcasting whatsoever and look at it more as a public utility. And if there is any real challenge that you have, it is to try to smooth things over with those government officials that feel that in some way they have been hurt, and show them that there is a real benefit to broadcasting, and that we are really trying to do good things for our communities. And those government officials who don't understand broadcasting, trying to educate them.
What's your, you mentioned earlier that you came from the background of some print interest and some investment background before you came into broadcasting. What's your perception of broadcasting now that you've been in it for many years in comparison to what you thought it was prior to the time that you and your father decided to make the commitment?
I love it very much. It's, I have an engineer who works with me, who's been with me since day one, a gentleman by the name of Jim Leadham, who has been very active in the association, and he commented to me when we first got involved with it that broadcasting is one of the most addictive things there is. And I didn't really believe him at the time, but I've seen it. We have people who may resign to take up an insurance job, and they're back knocking on the door in 2 months. So I think once you get involved with it, you can never get out of it.
What kinds of things that you have in mind, or had in mind in terms of the way that the association was making progress, do you still see out there in the future, future jobs of the association in terms of representation of broadcasters?
I think we have to continually watch what's going on in state and local governments. I think that we have to be very supportive of Media Nebraska and keep an eye on freedom of the press.
Media Nebraska, the lobbying group that
Yes,
you mentioned
exactly.
about pursuing it.
Yes. Cameras in the courts, I think, is another topic, and making sure that we get the Nebraska Broadcasters Association Foundation up and running to its fullest capacity.
What would be the fullest capacity for the foundation in your view?
Oh, the sky's the limit on that. Right at the moment, I'd like to see us get about $1 million in there in seed money, and then we can have some fun.
When you started the foundation, when you were the president, and it was primarily your leadership and organization and determination, I guess, that sort of pulled it along, and a true example of leadership. What were the kinds of things that you put together in terms of the process to get it going?
Well, you had to form the foundation, first of all, legally. And after that was accomplished, we had to file with the IRS to get our charitable status. And that in itself was a lengthy process. So, I mean, then the effort of trying to get some money to help pay the attorney bills and maybe a little something for the stationery and postage was difficult to begin with, but that's all taken care of now. I think that the sky's the limit if we can work it properly. We have a lot of broadcasters within the state and outside the state who have grown up and made their fortunes off of broadcasting, and I think this would be a good opportunity for them to give something back.
What's your perception as an Omaha broadcaster, but having had the statewide leadership position of broadcasting in the state outside of Omaha?
Run that by me again.
Well, we've talked something about Omaha radio, and you've been a visible leader in the Metropolitan Omaha Radio Broadcasters Association. But yet, as somebody who's been on the board of directors of the State Association and president of the State Association, and really been the founder of the State Broadcasters Foundation, the question is, how do you see the participation, the role, the leadership, the styles of broadcasters throughout the state outside of Omaha?
Oh, I think we have some extremely capable individuals outside of the Omaha market. I mean, it's perfectly obvious. Individuals such as Charlie Brogan, who is immediate past president of Nebraska Broadcaster Association, has done a spectacular job. I alluded to Rob Thomas, past president. There are, when I started in the association as a director, first thing I noticed was how dedicated individuals were from all over the state. You'd have somebody who may have been way out in the Sandhills who would do his radio shift and get up and drive halfway to Lincoln and then spend the night and then drive all the way in and turn around and do the process and go back and never would miss a meeting. It's the love of the industry and trying to perpetuate it that we're very fortunate to have individuals like that in Nebraska.
How do you compare broadcasting in Omaha and Nebraska with broadcasters around the country as you move around the country? You mentioned you were in Boston recently when some things were happening.
I think we have broadcasters that are, well, I would like to think that we probably have better broadcasters in Omaha and in Nebraska. Those that I've been associated with, for the most part, seem to be very honest hard-working individuals, the type of individual that you find within this state. That is not to say that individuals in Boston and other places are not hard-working, but for some reason there is an element within the state of Nebraska that I think really is good. I mean, it's a quality individual, and maybe that's because this is my home and I look at it that way. But I think we compare, as just as good, if not better, than most of the broadcasters in the United States.
John, a couple of times you mentioned that you had a lot of fun with KEFM, fun when you changed the format, and fun when we did some other kinds of things that are part of it. Talk a little bit about when you look at the program content of the radio station and you say, this is fun, what are some of those variables?
Well, in the early days of it, when we switched format, as I mentioned, I had a bunch of renegade announcers who came over to join me.
What do you mean by renegade announcers?
Well, they just basically wandered in from other stations, or they'd been fired by another owner, and they came walking through, told they'd never work again, and I switched formats, and they were standing in the lobby waiting for me when I walked in one morning, and then some of their friends followed. And we just sort of pieced together the format as what we felt was missing within the Omaha market without any research. We put together a lead-in to our news in the morning, which was the theme from The Exorcist, a piece called Tubular Bells, and all of a sudden I had phone calls from church groups saying that I was into Satanism. It was an interesting era, and I really enjoyed it. It's still fun, but it's become so competitive. Everything is tested. All our music is tested. I don't get to go back and throw something on that I might like to hear. From time to time, there are issues that we address in our news and public affairs broadcasting that I say, I think we better, try and do something because there's going to be something bad happening in the city. But I stay out of programming a lot now. I consider myself to be a creative individual, so I work, more with advertising and promotion now, and let the program director, music director, and consultant run things.
When did it change from going to the back room and pulling out something that you wanted to hear in the area of the consultants and the research?
I'd say probably about 5-6 years ago. I just really don't have a handle on it, but all of a sudden it happened.
How did it happen?
Well, the radio stations, you had more stations within the market. When I started, there were 11 stations. Now I think we have 19, 20 commercial broadcasters in Omaha. So the formats, you could have a much broader format in the early days. Now you're more targeted with demographics. And so I suppose as more stations came in and started chipping away at different pieces of the pie, in order to stay alive, you had to become more focused. And as you become more focused, you go through your research and guide it that way. I think basically when you had more stations moving into the market, is what caused it.
Talk about the milestones in the evolution of broadcasting since you've been in it. In terms of the station, you mentioned, for example, the tower was originally downtown and is now somewhere else and so forth. That's a financial commitment to be able to move those kinds of things around. Why would you do that sort of thing?
Well, for one thing, the tower wasn't very high. I think we were probably only about 265 feet up and throwing out a 100,000 watt signal. Omaha being very hilly, our signal wouldn't reach, even at that power, some of the people who wanted to listen to us. We also had a horrible situation in that we were throwing out so much RF that we were coming in on people's answering services and just about anything that was electrical in downtown Omaha. we had one Judge Caniglia, who was trying to try a murder trial, and we kept coming in over his loudspeakers. So it was one of those things where the first year or so, I spent most of my time running around trying to appease people that we were coming in on their phone systems, or Judge Caniglia or whoever else it may be. But I consider the fact that we moved out of that situation to not a tower where we could not only throw out a signal but would not cause interference to anyone was great in itself. There are things, you measure with getting a staff organized of people who have been around for a long, long time. I'd say, if I wanted to lay down milestones, I sort of look at the people that have been with me and when they came on board, and we're a very people-oriented operation, and I look at them all as my family. So I look back and I say, well, this is a good thing, because maybe Dwight Lane, who's our program director, he came on in this year, and he's been with us for 10 years. And started up with Jim Leadham, our engineer, and he's been there for 13. And so I look at the people, I suppose.
Your family has been prominent in the Omaha community for a long time, prior to the time that you got into broadcasting. And you must find some people that you deal with who view you as a longtime member of the community, and other people who view you as a broadcaster. Some people don't necessarily find those compatible. How do people view you, your business associates or clients or friends?
I think due to the fact we've tried to give something back to the community, I don't think I see very much of that. It's people who are trying to do something know that they come around to Light 96 KEFM and get something done for their group, and they know that I have an interest in the community, and that those that work with me do too. So while we've been around for a long time, I think that helps. I mean, I don't think that they look at us being two separate things. It's, once in a while perhaps on some issues, but I think for the most part people look at us as being a home-based operation.
When you got the opportunity to get the license, you chose the FM station. In retrospect, that was probably a wonderful decision. How has the market changed, the radio climate changed over the years between the time that you went on the air and with KEFM and now?
Well, the AMs have continued, unfortunately, it seems, to drop off in their audience share. It's interesting that when we applied for the license, everything on the license was targeted towards receiving the AM. And the FM was just sort of thrown together overnight as a secondary thought. But after 8 years before the federal government, everything had changed so dramatically that the FM was the way to go. But you look at the early applications, everybody targeted the AM side. FMs have continued in growth. As I said, they become much more targeted. AM is more of a news talk type of format anymore, which I think is unfortunate, but I don't know what the solution is.
Some people talk about whether a community is a good radio market or not, and what they mean is do they get a realistic share of the advertising monies that are available in the market? How about Omaha?
I don't really know if saying realistic share is what I would look at as being a good radio market. We've been very beneficial in Omaha, not beneficial, but it's been great for us to be in Omaha, in that Omaha's economy has remained stable throughout the years and continued to grow. I think much as Lincoln's has, and some of our other smaller cities within the state. We haven't relied on industries which have been impacted on both coasts. So as you'll recall, 6-7 years ago when we had a major recession, what happened to us in Nebraska was that we were fairly stable, which allowed us as broadcasters, who are, and as I said, majority of our income comes from local business. We just sort of went on where stations on the East and West Coast were dying off. So it's a very attractive, stable market to be in. You still have to get that share, but the share comes with ratings and what you can do for your clients. You could be in the best market in the world and not have those things, and it still wouldn't be a great market for you. But if you're doing your job and you work with the community, I think that you can make some good money in Omaha.
How important are on-air personalities in the audience perception of a radio station?
I think it's very important. Our announcers are constantly out before the public. My morning team probably will be at anywhere from 5 to 10 events on a weekend. Your rest of the announcing crew probably in one way or another will be in maybe 1 or 2 events. Constantly out before the public. All of our announcers have been with us for, I'd say, at least 7 years. There are some that have been around for 10. And so they're known before the community, not only from being on the air, but from being out before them on personal appearances.
How do you get people to remember the station, the frequency, the slogan, the announcers, and write it down in the rating book?
Well, yeah, we thought we could do something like a Dear Diary promotion, but Arbitron didn't like that. Well, I don't know. It's you hammer away at it. You constantly try to be as visible as you can. We run contesting on a limited scale, but nevertheless there is contesting because it's usually shown that people that fill out the diaries participate in the contests. But television, newspaper to some degree, but I really sort of shy away from that. Billboard, I mean, we're constantly out before the public. But the personal appearances really, Larry, is what we really try to hone in on and being involved in community events.
You mentioned that you like to deal with some of the promotion and creative kinds of materials and so forth. What one of those kinds of things stands out in your mind as something that was fun to do and successful and so forth?
Well, this wasn't really anything material, but since it's Halloween, we gave away electric brooms with extra long extension cords for a couple of Halloweens running, and Steve Albertson and I, Steve being our music director and production man, put together a sound effect thing where you had a witch sort of taking off with kickstarting a jet engine, and then you could hear her in the background as this thing took off, and if you called in, then you had a chance of winning these wonderful electric brooms. So that type of thing. I've had some that were failures that the clients didn't really like that much, but
realistically, in the big coverage area that your station serves, what's the target in terms of the amount of audience that you'd like to be able to show in terms of rating response?
I would like to have a cume audience of at least 100,000 listeners. That's predominantly what we maintain. We target our station is a female-oriented station. We target women 25, 54 years old. Narrowing that down 34, 44. And usually in the rating books, we rank in the top 3 in all female demographics, except for those 18 years and below, who will probably go over to a rocker or a country. But we've been fairly successful in that area.
What's the future of AM radio? I realize you're not in the AM business, but you have to pay attention to those stations.
I am very interested in seeing what may happen as technology moves along and the FCC makes some moves. We're talking about different forms of digital broadcasting and I think that, there could be a possibility that AM could reemerge as a prominent force in the broadcast industry. I've been tempted from time to time to maybe go out and buy up a couple of defunct AMs with that in mind. I think there's a future in it. It just depends on the FCC and how they move.
What's the interest that you have as an operator for the audience outside of metropolitan Omaha?
I'd always felt that I would expand out right at the moment for the prices that people are paying for radio stations. It makes it somewhat difficult to go out and purchase additional stations. So I think probably we do anything, we'll stay in Nebraska and in the Omaha area.
What do you think about the audience that receives that 80-mile radio signal of KEFM who don't live in Omaha?
What do I think about them?
Yeah. Are those folks that you try to...
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Yes. In fact, we have people who win contests who are from all over the listening area. We have people who are on an Air Force base in up above Sioux Falls, South Dakota, that used to come in and enter the contest, and we have a very large listenership, I'm told, at the state pen. So, but unfortunately, they don't have diaries. So,
well, I guess that's something different, isn't it? John, what other kinds of things have we not covered in our conversation that you would like to bring up, please?
I can't think of anything. I just it's been a pleasure talking with you, and also working with you on the board and working with you on the foundation, Larry.
We've been recording this on October the 29th, 1996. Our guest has been John Webster, the individual who holds the license for KEFM in Omaha. John, thank you very much.
Thank you.